wasn't long ago that children-only cemeteries like this one were all over the country, filled with children who died from what we now know are preventable and curable diseases. Today, though, more children end up in places like this because of their parents. These days, around 2 youngsters die each year from whooping cough. 27 are murdered by their parents, half of those by their mothers. Dr. Xanthi Mallet is a forensic expert. In this documentary, she'll profile some of the most despised women in history as we try and unravel the complex question of what ignites the devil within. Mothers who murder.
Sydney is a city of profound contrasts. It is beautiful and brutal, seductive and sinister. This is what we put on postcards and show the world. But just a short drive away, in the poor neighbourhoods of the western suburbs, struggle and misery often reveal themselves in the worst possible ways. But even against that harsh backdrop, what 26-year-old Rachel Pfitzner did sent an entire community into meltdown.
I remember the day well, actually. 17th of October was a Wednesday.
It was 2007, and Inspector Russell Oxford was the lead detective on a case he still can't shake.
The more you learn, the more tragic it is, and the sadder it is when you really look at what happened to this poor little boy.
That little boy is 22-month-old Dean Shillingsworth, Rachel Pfitzner's son, her second of 3 children. Since birth, Dean had suffered at the hands of his mother. The family was well known to child protection agencies and the police, and there had been long legal battles over who should have custody of Dean for his own safety. His grandmother was the only one who seemed to care.
He was very playful. Very playful he was. He was a happy little boy.
Anne Coffey's son, Paul, is Dean's dad. He was in and out of trouble with the law and was in prison when Dean died.
Poor Dean, I suppose in a way, wasn't the favoured child.
But no one could have predicted the sort of horror Rachel Pfitzner was capable of.
In the weeks leading up to Dean's murder, his mother was spiralling out of control, and she knew it. And the abuse only got worse. It was now impossible to hide the bruises on his little body. And, as well as the beatings, she would regularly punish him by locking him out of the house. He was just 2 years old. And protection was the one torturing him.
For the purpose of this interview, what is your full name?
Rachel Louise Pfitzner.
For the very first time, we can show her police interviews and reenactment, recorded the day she was arrested. As you'll see, something changed on that clear October morning that even Rachel Pfitzner herself can't explain.
Can you just indicate, just for the camera as well, how you picked him up?
I picked him up in the sand here by the jumper.
Jumper? And then what did you do there? Can you just...
I was there shaking him.
Shaking him? And where did that happen?
Right here.
Okay.
She's calm, rarely crying or showing remorse, as she describes in spine-chilling detail every moment.
What was doing? Was he crying? Was he yelling or screaming or anything?
Nothing, just grasping for him.
She grabbed him and she said she shook him violently and just continued to shake him and shake him and shake him to the point where he passed out and started to convulse.
I picked him up by his shoulder and I was just like shaking him from side to side.
What did Dean do while you were doing that?
Just like this, clinging to his jumper. Something just completely came over me. I don't know what it was. I had no control over it.
With her bare hands, she squeezed the life out of her own son. And it didn't stop there.
I know I pushed him.
And where did he fall?
Down here.
In this moment, Rachel Pfitzner had complete power over whether her son would live or die.
And then when I pushed him, when I seen him laying on the ground, I realised he was dying.
But instead of screaming for help or calling an ambulance, she tried to revive him herself.
Tried pumping his chest. Breathed again and tried pumping his chest. But I was too late.
How did you check if he was breathing?
I put my hand on his heart, I felt it going real fast, and then it just stopped.
Dean Shillingsworth was dead.
Yeah, this was very sad because of the age of the young child and really the helplessness. And if you think about that this little child didn't have a say in anything what happened. Didn't have a say at all. And to think that that snatched away from him and he had no idea it was coming. That's what's sad to me.
Retired Supreme Court Judge Anthony Wheely has presided over some of Australia's most notorious murder trials involving mothers.
I think that it is so unnatural a crime that it brings out a reaction in us that is almost genetic. We are so affronted and horrified by the concept of a mother who takes the life of her child that we can see nothing else around it other than that must be the worst crime imaginable.
With her 2 other children still in the house, Rachel calmly carried Dean's body to an upstairs bedroom. Grabbing a plastic bag from a kitchen drawer and another from an upstairs cupboard. Listen to how she describes Dean's lifeless body as she covered his head and put him inside.
I can't even remember how I picked him up, but I know he was clutched over like that.
Right.
And I put him in.
Do you know how you put him in the bag? Can you just describe or show me how you put him in the bag?
I can't even recall how I put him in, but I know he was clutched over like that when I put him in.
Yeah.
And finally, to hide her terrible crime, she placed her son's body in an old suitcase.
I would have put the suitcase down here somewhere and then I put Dean in it. And then I done the suitcase up, buckled it up.
Can you just indicate for the camera, just show me how you did that? Put him in the bag, the suitcase?
I would have picked up by the handle. I would have put it in the suitcase. I probably would have been kneeling down like this once he was put in, and then I done it up and buckled it up. And then I took the suitcase downstairs.
Okay.
The little boy been suffocated and humiliated. And then to be put in a bag, it's so distressing to think about it.
When we come back, how Rachel Pfitzner disposed of Dean's body and the lynch mob that wanted her dead.
They're baying for blood, essentially. It was just scary to her and scary to all of us.
It's lunchtime, October the 11th, 2007. 26-year-old Rachel Pfitzner has just murdered her son, Dean Shillingsworth, with her 2 other children nearby. The 2-year-old was shaken and pushed so violently, his tiny body couldn't take the abuse anymore.
You recall that you told me his heart was going faster? And how did you see that?
Because I put my hand on his chest.
Okay.
And then I felt his pulse, but he had no pulse.
Yep.
But Rachel Pfitzner wasn't finished. Mundarama Reserve is like an oasis in these densely built-up suburbs. And, as it turns out, a dumping ground for a child killer.
She decided to take his clothes off and wrap him into plastic, and had a plastic bag on his head, and the little boy was placed inside another plastic bag, which was a cover of a doona. And then he was put into a suitcase, and then she took the little boy in the suitcase in a pram and wheeled him down a couple of kilometres away to the lake in Ambervale, filled the bag with rocks, and then near the bridge there allowed the suitcase to drop into the water and watch it while it was submerged before she left.
I laid off and then just pushed it over like that.
And then she just calmly walked home.
week later when school children playing by the lake found the suitcase and opened it.
Very distressing sight once we were confronted, once we arrived there. We found out that a couple of young kids had found the body in the bag about 5 o'clock that afternoon.
The murder of 2-year-old Dean Shillingsworth shocked the community.
3 days later, Dean was identified. Rachel was arrested and brought back to the lake. And this time, the whole world was watching.
Okay, you're happy with the security at this location?
Yes.
Okay, and you're happy to continue? Okay.
Across the lake, hundreds of angry locals had gathered.
The public were out sitting on the footpath with chairs and eskies and sitting watching as if it's theatre.
You can actually hear their screams as she's reenacting her terrible crimes.
Okay, just stop here and we'll just get the screen cap first.
It was a lynch mob.
To the point where there was people yelling out obscenities and threats, and the noise got louder and louder and louder. And we're actually walking, if you can imagine, walking into the dark towards the lake. And behind us in the dark, we could hear the voices, we could hear the crowd yelling, they were baying for blood, essentially. It was just scary to her and scary to all of us, and I don't mind admitting that.
You want to keep going or you want to stop?
I want to stop.
Okay.
Now, the police were protecting the killer.
And the crowd was starting to run towards us. So there's anything up to 300 to 400 people surrounding us. But the community outrage to this was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was, the community were aghast about what had happened.
On the day she was arrested, Rachel gave a chilling explanation to police, somehow trying to justify her action. And her whole motivation boils down to this point. She told them that every time she looked at little Dean, all she could see was his father, Paul Shillingsworth, a man she now despised.
Bad memories coming in my head. All I could see when I looked at Dean was his father, Paul. I know he's only a kid, but in my mind, it just seemed like I was looking at Paul.
So obviously she didn't like the father, so she took it out on the child. To me, that's not any excuse at all to do that.
Dr. Julian Parmigiani is a forensic psychiatrist, an expert in human and criminal behaviour. He knows these types of women better than anyone.
People with borderline personality disorder got an instability of relationships, identity and mood, and also have anger management problems.
I wonder what he'd be doing today when he was still alive.
Dean's grandparents, Anne Coffey and Edmund Caban, rarely come to the lake these days. It's just too hard. They like the plaque that's been placed here in his honour.
What do you see when you look at this lake now?
It's sad, make me sad, very sad.
Sentenced to 25 years in jail, Rachel Pfitzner won't be eligible for parole until 2027.
At times still haunts me at times when you think about it. I've said this before, kids just want to be loved by their family and grow up and have chances to do things in life. And this is another case where this little kid didn't have a chance.
The case forced changes to child protection laws in New South Wales. But would they have made a difference to Dean Shillingsworth? Or was his tragic destiny determined at birth? The answer might just lie in this final word from Rachel Pfitzner.
How do I feel now? Feels like a big relief.
It's times like these when kids are involved that you should take stock of what you are, where you are and what you're doing, and go home and hug your kids. I really believe that.
Next, the mother who stabbed and burned her 3 children, and the father who may never recover.
Life has never been the same since. It's just...
From its earliest days, crime has infected the streets of Melbourne. But few criminals have made people's blood boil more than Kylie Fowler.
Being a dad, I feel like I've been ripped off so many times in every aspect.
Her former partner, Dominic Marr, has suffered unimaginable loss. 2 children of his own and an older stepdaughter.
Life has never been the same since. It's just...
18-year-old Samantha. Melanie, 13. And little brother, Matthew, was just 11. On a hot Sunday afternoon, just after New Year's in 2011, their mother's madness came to life.
And it's gutless, like it's a gutless way to do it. But I mean, if you did something like that, why would you take your kids out? I mean, I just don't understand that.
Kylie lived with her 2 youngest kids here in Heidelberg Heights, 20 minutes northeast of the city. Sam, the oldest, was already out on her own and estranged from her mum.
In terms of kids, Samantha was just, she was unbelievable. She was really outgoing, really positive, smart at school.
She dreamed of being a paramedic. Melanie was the animal lover in the family. Her dad called her his ray of sunshine.
She was just the best. It was just...
And Matt, the youngest, was the joker.
He'd be sitting in his high chair and he'd be eating his tea and his plate would be sitting on top of his head and he's like crashed down asleep like that in the high chair. He'd have potato and sauce and stuff everywhere.
They all lived hand to mouth and made the best of what little they had. But Kylie Fowler was tormented. There were demons in her head.
I don't want to use the word vulnerable, but I want to use where she was like a injured bird, like a bird with a broken wing sort of thing, and I felt like I could fix that as well.
Sadly, it was already too late for that. Years earlier, Kylie and Dominic had another son, Michael, their youngest, who died from SIDS while the family slept. He was just 7 weeks old.
I can remember I found him, but he was actually in bed with her. And I couldn't make out how she, being who she was, being mum and everything, how she could physically get out of bed without noticing the difference in colour that he was. And I don't know, I grabbed him and stuff, and to this day, I still sit there and think that she might have had something to do with it.
But she was never accused or even investigated, and Dominic eventually put his suspicions out of his head.
Kylie and I started falling apart. I think she took it a lot worse than I did.
But was it the trigger for a far greater tragedy?
There's no doubt that Kylie Fowler was a deeply troubled woman who'd battled mental illness since her early childhood and was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia. That triggered long bouts of paranoia, anxiety, and even hallucinations. In fact, in the 20 years leading up to the murders, she was in and out of mental hospitals. 5 times she was committed against her will. And all of that was made worse by the fact that she lived in a constant state of denial, refusing to accept that there was anything wrong with her.
I suppose with me it's just, why was it kind of her and not me?
James Elks was Samantha's boyfriend.
She just gave off like that very warm, sweet vibe, I suppose.
They were teenagers in love. On that dreadful Sunday, James and Samantha came to visit Kylie and the kids around 4 o'clock. Sam went in, but James was kept out. That alone should have set off alarm bells.
Then as I kind of went to step in, I got shoved out. And then the door was slammed and locked.
At that moment, there was no turning back. Kylie Fowler was rambling, dangerous, and armed with a knife.
Did you actually see the knife? Did you know what had happened?
Yeah, because when Kylie came back, she was holding a knife, basically, so yeah.
Locked in the house, Samantha was in desperate trouble, and she knew it. Through the door, she begged James to save her.
Sam came to the door, and there was a lot of blood. At that stage, Kylie came back out, and she had kind of a very kind of twisted look on her face. And then she grabbed Sam, kind of threw her against a wall, and then dragged her off.
But James was helpless, and by now, what was happening inside was horrific.
What James saw and heard was his girlfriend dying right before his very eyes. Samantha had been stabbed 31 times, mostly to the back of the head. She was bleeding to death at the back door, but couldn't escape.
And through it all, there was no sign of Matthew or Melanie, not a sound.
But did you wonder at any point where they were at this minute?
I figured that they were, already dead on arrival.
Kylie Fowler stabbed Matthew so many times she could barely raise her arms anymore.
I sit there and I just probably think that they were wanting either mum or dad, and if they initially knew what mum was doing to them, I just don't know what would have went through their heads. I mean, I couldn't imagine anything worse than being alive, living as a young person, looking up to mum and dad, and then finding that mum's done what she's done. You know what I mean? Like, it's just the worst possible thing.
Having killed her children, Kylie Fowler then set fire to the house, hell-bent on killing herself as well.
Suddenly, the windows that I was near just exploding outwards, and a lot of flames and a fair bit of smoke.
It was over. Kylie, Samantha, Melanie and Matthew were all dead. Police came to Dominic Marr's work to break the news.
And then he told me that he told me that Matt and Mel were both dead. And I just couldn't believe it. And I sat there and I asked him what happened to Sam. And he told me that Sam was dead. And that Kylie was dead. And I just, don't know, felt, just went aggro. Just couldn't handle it.
This wasn't the first time Dominic Marr's life had been turned upside down by tragedy. Kylie and the kids were his second family, his second chance. Just a few years earlier, the love of his life, Beck, and their baby, Zach, were killed by a drunk driver within sight of their house.
Yeah, she basically put him in the car, and it was probably about less than maybe 500 or 600 metres down. That somebody ran into her, and I can still remember hearing it. But I still remember hearing the accident happen.
Dominic has lost 4 children and a stepdaughter. 3 murdered, 1 stolen by cot death, another killed by a drunk.
There's terrible, terrible trauma and tragedy for families and friends. Doesn't matter which case you do. It doesn't matter what sort of murder case it is. There are very sad aftertones to the whole affair, and you're very much conscious of that.
My favourite memories were my first day of school and an excursion to the zoo in prep because I love seeing all of the animals.
I go down the shop and you hear, I still hear it, you hear little kids like under 3 or 4 and they're going, "Daddy, Daddy." And I always turn around and, I don't know, it just flashback or something, I don't know.
And Dominic Marr has one last chance, he says, to be a good dad. He has another son from a new relationship, Tristan, who's now 6. When they're together, Dominic doesn't let him out of his sight. And somehow, he is at peace with Kylie Fowler.
Even now, after what's happened, I mean, I probably still spend every day wishing that she was still here. I mean, a lot of people out of this hate her and they can't understand why she did it and they think that she was very selfish for doing what she did. But, you know, at the end of the day, life or something got in her way, and even though she took the children out of this world, I mean, there's not a day that I don't wish that they weren't still here, and her as well. I mean, I wouldn't be in love with her or anything like that, but she's still the mother of my children.
When we come back, the woman who washed her murdered sons and laid them in bed, because that's what good mothers do.
With a teddy bear tucked under his arm.
North Balwyn lies right in the middle of Melbourne's middle class, where weekends are filled with dinner parties, junior sport and ballet lessons. On the surface, the Fitchett family was a perfect fit. Donna was a nurse, husband David played golf in his spare time, and their sons, Thomas and Matthew, were smart and funny.
By all accounts, Donna was a very good mother, and by all accounts, David was a very good father. They had problems between Donna and David, which had been building up, obviously, until Donna decided to say that she was going to leave him.
If only it was that simple. Instead, Donna's twisted mind was planning something that was so unexpected, her husband, family and neighbours never suspected a thing. It was September the 6th, 2005.
One of those cold Melbourne nights where it was very still, and that sort of stuck in my mind for whatever reason, I don't know why. That sort of stayed with me till this day. I can picture the stillness of the night.
When David Fitchett arrived home from work that night at 6:30, the house was in darkness save for a dim light coming from the kitchen. He found his wife standing in the hallway, dressed only in her underwear. She was unsteady on her feet and was visibly angry. She turned and stumbled in the doorway of the master bedroom, and he followed her in. What he found would change the course of his life forever.
It looked like your average suburban house with two young children living in it, basically. Then you obviously see the 2 boys in different rooms, and it sort of brings home the gravity of what's occurred inside the house.
11-year-old Thomas was lying on his parents' bed. He was as still as the weather outside.
David Fitchett touched his eldest son Thomas on the forehead, but his eyes were closed and he was cold. He listened for a heartbeat and tried desperately to revive him, but it was too late. Frantic, this desperate father then searched for Matthew. His mind racing and blinded with panic and grief, he found the 9-year-old lying on his bed. But like his brother, he too was cold. And David, in that moment, realised that both his sons were dead, murdered by their mother.
Donna Fitchett had drugged, strangled and suffocated her 2 boys. She then bathed their bodies, put their pyjamas on and tucked them into bed. She later called it her greatest act of love.
Young Matthew was in a room pretty much adjacent to the master bedroom. He was laying on his bed, again in pyjamas, with a teddy bear tucked under his arm. I still recall that the family dog was a big Rottweiler at the back door, Gemma. It had become apparent later on that the dog had actually tried to intervene when Donna was trying to kill young Matthew. and they'd put the dog outside. I've never seen a dog that frantic at all the crime scenes I'd been involved in.
But Donna's ultimate plan failed because she survived. And she's never fully explained why she did it.
I think for revenge, to get back at David. Maybe she held that much resentment, in my personal opinion, there's that much resentment towards David that this was the way to get back at him.
Did she show any remorse at any time?
Not to me, not that I'm aware of.
So she loved her boys, but maybe she hated her husband more?
Possibly. Only one person knows, but she won't say.
Do you think she ever will talk about it?
No. It's the last little bit of control she's got.
Donna Fitchett stood trial twice because of a legal technicality. And on both occasions, the jury refused to accept that she was insane. In fact, the judge in the retrial noted that she knew exactly what she was doing, thought about it, and planned it. He then jailed her for 27 years.
24 people have got it right. It's not one trial, it's two trials. The law is a joke. The law is an ass. One judge got it wrong, so we had to go through a retrial. Another 12 people saw through the absolute shallow, pathetic defence that she put up.
It'd have to be a very severe depression, and there have to be some irrational thoughts attached to that depression. Again, you know, the majority of people with depression don't go and kill their children. The majority of people will hopefully get some help, get better and get on with their lives and become much more positive.
Probably the best insight into Donna Fitchett's troubled mind comes from her own words. The suicide note she wrote to her husband in the minutes after she'd murdered Thomas and Matthew.
Dear David, I'm so sorry for your pain upon the discovery of what I've done. I didn't do it because I'm angry with you. I forgive you for whatever hurt you caused me. You can't help it. I just couldn't abandon our beautiful boys. I've been dead for a few days and I just wanted peace. I overdosed the boys, and when they were asleep, I suffocated them and then strangled them in case they woke up. They put up a bit of a struggle, but they said nothing. They didn't know it was me or it was happening to each other. They were happy this morning and they said they loved you and had a great Father's Day. I pray I do not live through this. I've said some angry things, but I truly forgive you. I hope you find the strength to go on without us.
My boys, I love them, I miss them, and I can't say more.
Whether you want to admit it or not, it does affect you. It takes a little bit of your soul each time I think you see this kind of stuff, but I think it makes you determined to give the boys some justice.
Still ahead, the party mum, whose little boy was interfering with her life, so she ended his.
And she sort of looked around and then she's basically placed the kid in the water.
It's November 2010, and Perth is riding the crest of the mining boom. It's a cashed-up city with confidence. And, like many her age, 22-year-old Gemma Killen is enjoying the ride. But there's a problem. The son, 22-month-old Caden. Gemma and her partner Eddie would often argue over who should stay at home and look after the toddler, while the other went out.
Most things that people do have a reason, but they're not reasons that you can give for the death of a child.
November 25th that year started normally enough. Gemma sunbaked in the morning, then visited this shopping centre with Caden, where she got her nails done. But just a few hours later, he was dead and she was in custody.
She carried out this crime. Could only end one way, and that's with the death of her son. It couldn't have ended any other way.
It all happened here at Hillary's Boat Harbour on Perth's northern beaches. It's a marina and tourist precinct, popular with families, and its car park is enormous. That afternoon, Gemma Killen claimed her son had been snatched from his pram by a predator.
Suspicions were being aroused initially, yes. I mean, what we've got initially when I got there was a young mother, very upset.
She seemed to enjoy playing the victim, but it was all a deadly act. Gemma had deliberately sent searchers in the wrong direction to the north car park, allowing enough time for Caden to drown. She had already placed him in the water, some distance away by the south car park.
Just shocking, really, and they just total disregard for her baby's life.
Chris McGrath works at his family cafe at the marina. What Gemma Killen didn't know was their security cameras were recording her every move.
Where did she park?
I think she parked, would have been this bay or one of this bay, and she got out of the car. She's grabbed the kid out of the car, and then she sort of looked around, and then she's basically placed the kid in the water.
What happened next, quite simply, defies comprehension and reveals the chilling truth about Gemma Killen. There were 2 crucial minutes here that should have changed this story. 2 minutes that were the difference between life and death for little Caden. She paced up and down, apparently contemplating what she was doing. The judge who eventually sent Killen to prison said that in those vital moments, any normal, loving mother would have been overwhelmed by the instinct to protect their child from danger. But instead, Gemma Killen turned away, calmly walked to her car and drove off.
Caden's murder had been caught on camera.
And the clincher was that we saw her car drive into the car park. At no stage did Miss Killen say that she was in that area. She denied being in that area. And then it showed her actions from that point on until she left the car park.
Looked like she just wanted to just throw the baby and go. And it was the most disgusting thing to watch because she didn't hang around, she didn't hesitate, she just put the baby in the water and then she was out of there.
Never looked back?
No.
Caden was found that night by a couple on their regular evening walk. He was face down in the water, and despite their desperate efforts to revive him, he never took another breath.
She didn't ask anything about the conditions under which Caden had been located. We told her, and she didn't ask any additional questions.
Is that unusual in your experience?
Very. Yes. Everyone wants to know what happened.
Of course, Gemma Killen already knew the horrible truth, and her behaviour only got her deeper into trouble, especially at the hospital, where a doctor was formally declaring her son dead.
By that stage, she'd already made a posting on Facebook.
At the hospital?
Yes.
Do you believe that she meant to kill her son?
Yes, I do.
There was a temporary memorial for Caden here at the boat harbour for months. Strangers would bring flowers, and that terrible day is still talked about sometimes.
It's never going to be forgotten in something so tragic like that. I don't think it ever can be forgotten.
Or forgiven. And probably the most frightening thing about Gemma Killen is the fact there's absolutely nothing wrong with her. No history of mental illness, no evidence of abuse. Her own childhood was loving and happy. No apparent triggers or trauma.
The first response by most people is, oh, that's abnormal, it's got to be a mental illness. However, when we look at it, in a number of cases, there's very understandable human emotions like anger and wanting revenge and or totally not wanting to care for a child.
When Justice Stephen Hall sentenced Killen here at the Supreme Court in Perth, he described her as selfish and self-absorbed. He then locked her up for life with a minimum term of 13 years. So consider this. Gemma Killen could walk free in 2023 when she'll be just 35 years old, with plenty of time left to have more children if she wants to. Her only problem might be finding a willing father.
As we've seen, it's hard to imagine a crime that inspires more anger or hatred. The victims are usually too young to defend themselves, and for whatever reason, their mothers just can't seem to stop themselves.
People will murder for money, jealousy, anger, love, against other adults. I can't think of any reason for murdering a child.
When you look back with the benefit of hindsight, there are probably, many things that you could have done. But of course, at the time, you just don't think that, you should be doing anything because it's someone else's child. You need to sit an exam to drive a car. You need to do so many hours of training. But anyone can have children, which is a far more complex issue.
But for retired Supreme Court Judge Anthony Wheely, there is always hope, even for the worst among us.
Generally, I think forgiveness is apt in most criminal offences.
Even for women who've murdered their own children?
I think maybe particularly in that case, yes.
So then, knowing what we know now, what is it that drives these women, and many like them, to commit these despicable crimes? Well, it would be far too simple to label them all mad. In the case of Gemma Killen, for instance, we know she wasn't. Far from it. The truth is that these cases are so different and so complex that question is almost impossible to answer. Yes, there are common threads, such as mental illness, but sadly, no definitive answer or warning sign. As a scientist, when I set out to research this programme and my book, Mothers Who Murder, I refused to believe that pure evil existed in the world, and I'm still not convinced that it does. But after this whole experience, I now believe in monsters.